The Empress Ki, known natively as Ki Hwanhu, is a series not that well known outside of those familiar with Korean television, which is quite unfortunate as those not aware of it are missing out on something truly spectacular. Though my experience with K-dramas is limited, I would cite it as not only the best of that medium I've seen, but one of the greatest television series I've had the pleasure of viewing. It demonstrates not only how to handle a variety of plot lines and tones extremely well, with well-realised characters, but executing ideas many modern series claim to champion, with the coherency and honesty those series are lacking. As a preface, due to the difference between the historical figures and their characters within the series, I will be referring to the cast of characters by the names the series gives them. To get one aspect of its pilot episode out of the way, one concern many may have on jumping into it is how the initial scene establishes where Ki-yan, Emperor Ta-wan, and Wan-yu will be by the penultimate episode. This is excusable though, when anyone concerned with spoilers for historical drama probably ought to consider historical lectures as spoiler territory, and it opts to make things a true journey over the destination idea, which, unlike with some series people use that phrase to excuse inconsistent quality or poor endings with, the journey is truly worth it here. Going back to the topic of modern series, many in the West constantly harp on about female empowerment, when doing the opposite with many female characters only seeming strong superficially due to poor writing, having their femininity removed rather than flourishing, or having the male characters around them be weak or insidious enough that they look good by comparison. One may think that a series in which the early episodes has its protagonist pretend to be a man named Sun Yan, and protecting an incompetent and weak-willed prince has fallen under at least some of these checkmarks. But this is the difference between a series with good writing that explores its ideas well, and those which exist purely as propaganda made by those who don't care about what they claim to preach. Sun Yan is a competent warrior with a tough personality, but has her femininity peek out with things such as her embarrassment at Ta-wan's shameless behaviour. Her fighting style is also one more tied to compensating for the predisposition of men naturally having greater physical strength than women, with her swordplay featuring much parrying and direct clashes being rarer, along with her preference for archery. Her archery also shows a female strength, as her arrows are ones that require great stamina to fire perfectly, and stamina is certainly a strength of many women when taking a look at many athletes or keeping in mind the length of childbirth. She also has weaker alcohol tolerance than the men around her, which, I'll say from experience, is certainly more the mode rather than the exception for women. Meanwhile, the Prince Ta-wan, who soon becomes the Emperor of the Yuan dynasty, is characterized well. His weak will and incompetence is primarily due to being sheltered as a spoiled prince, and later used as a political puppet for Yuan Shao, with the growth of him gradually becoming a more worthy ruler. There are further rough patches on this path that crop up as the series goes on, but more on that soon. There's also the matter of the love triangle of the place both Wan-yu and Ta-wan come to have in Sun Yan's heart. Though the concept of a love triangle can bring about some of the most egregious examples of poorly written stories, to the point you could even make a career about calling out the awful trope, the Empress Ki explores the concept more thoroughly than most as a narrative device, rather than simply being a choice between which man she likes more, because if that was the case there wouldn't even be a choice. The situation is one of the conflict between what her heart desires and what is required of her in her attempt to use the Yuan dynasty to improve her native land of Goryeo. To steal a quote from the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, "Love is the death of duty" is certainly appropriate for this and many other character arcs in the series. The scenes earlier into the series involving romantic feelings between the characters, such as Wan-yu's confusion of his feelings for Sun Yan when still believing her to be a man, or the latter's reaction to Emperor Ta-wan's advances when he finds out the truth of her femininity, also offer a comedic element to the serious historical drama. It's through this and many other examples that we see how expertly it balances one of the most overlooked aspects of the series' quality, being its tone. A work that becomes too tonally dissonant between comedy and drama can lead to inconsistency, both in its identity and the writing quality of it, or one that becomes too focused on a specific tone can become monotonous. As with all great works, the Empress Ki understands this by having its comedic or light-hearted moments come from actions consistent with the characters, not having them entrenched too close to dramatic plot threads, and having them naturally blend into the advancing plot through character motivations. It's later in the series, once Sun Yan moves away from battlefield and circumstances make climbing up the female hierarchy of the Yuan Palace from maid to imperial concubine necessary, that her femininity is fully explored as an important part of her characterization, with it displaying well the way in which women held political sway in very patriarchal societies through intellect and covert maneuvers. Though she doesn't attempt to seduce Emperor Tawan, the love he feels towards the woman, now going by her true name of Ki Yan, naturally makes the Emperor one manipulated by her. It's from Yan's conflict with the Empress Tanashili, with both the latter's vicious attitude and the vengeance Yan eventually wishes to enact on her, helps show the dark side of the motherly need to protect, in a true display of the hell hath no fury like a woman scorned mantra. This change in setting for Yan, as well as other constantly moving plot lines, such as Wan Yu going from ruler of Goryeo to forced conscription along the Yuan borders, or his return to political power through combating the Eagle House's financial counterfeit and training the private military, helps show how the series has such a variety on what it focuses on, while maintaining consistent writing quality and tones, or even improving in both. The first episode displays elements of wuxia storytelling, and the following episodes can seem very action-oriented before the series eventually turns into more of a royal court drama of etiquette, courtesy, and subtle conflict, roughly a quarter of the way through its run. The latter manages to become even more tense than the open battles though, with the strict and dangerous nature of the palace and how even the most minor of things, such as a choice of clothing on a specific day, or one's wording to the wrong person, can drastically change the position in a manner very authentic to the etiquette of such royal courts. Wan Yu's story arc becomes one with more elements of mystery and criminal investigation, along with the slow build-up of his power base, unexpected of one whose initial arc was so rooted in combat. It's no surprise that references to the art of war become littered throughout the series once Yan is tutored by Tal Tal, with how the text is notable for its application in everyday life or business in terms of psychological tricks, in showing physical weapons aren't the only way to fight a complex and crucial battle. Going back to the subject of Tanashili, she leads into one of the series' greatest strengths, which is in character complexity and depth, with almost all the characters, even the more minor ones or those that are undeniably evil. Tanashili is arguably the most evil and detestable character in the series, with the nature of the murders she orchestrates along with denying or even being oblivious to the heinous nature of her crimes when confronted with them, yet is made an understandable character within such as the family she was born into encouraging such deplorable behaviour, being raised into a mindset of superiority, and the gradual decline of her influence making her delving into insanity very well done. The reverse can also be said with even the more heroic characters such as Wan Yu or Bai Kan, making it quite apparent displays of honour or kindness aren't given to those outside of their sphere. The same can be said of the series' first main villain, Yan Chal, who, despite his evil actions, selfishness and obsession with power, has many valid points in being the one single-handedly keeping enemies of the Empire at bay, and speaking truths on what would occur once those in the palace against him no longer have a common enemy to unite them. One of the other major strengths in its characters is how both major and minor characters are utilised perfectly in the plot, to an extent I've only seen a few other series perform in terms of the balance of their cast percentage and their importance to the plot. For example, such a distinctly supporting character as So, who spends most of the series as a loyal and nefarious servant with little actions outside her superior's will, ends up causing one of the most pivotal twists in the story through her interactions with other characters. Most of the characters also have tremendous character growth in a variety of manners, whether it be Yan's goal of vengeance against Dangisei come to be directed far more intensely towards those such as Tanashili or Bayan Kutu, as well as realising the importance of rising the court to save Goryeo, or more supporting characters such as Pak Bulhwa having to re-examine his lifestyle and priorities entirely when castrated in the manner many characters must when physically or mentally crippled, as I've mentioned elsewhere before. There is no shortage of extremely well realised characters. That talk of Khan before brings us to one of the most praiseworthy aspects of the Empress Ki, being how naturally it changes and expands on character conflicts. One may have expected this story to conclude with the downfall of Yuan Shao and his family, but it's only after Yuan Shao's end that the conflict in the series' quality reaches its peak. It might be from either its Chinese setting or the focus on history, but I'm reminded very much of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, as well as the fall of the Eastern Han history that the novel adapts. Don Zhuo was the major threat many allied against, but upon his assassination, attention turned to everyone else vying for power, with former allies such as Cao Cao or Yuan Shao becoming bitter enemies. The same is true here, as Yuan Shao's fall allows for Bai Khan's rise, and the genuine trust he gains with Taiwan, as well as the loyalty he inspires in his subordinates, makes him a far more dangerous adversary for Yan than Yuan Shao ever was, and his niece, that is made Empress, is shown to make Tanashili seem as little more than a hindrance, with her having the tact to keep her ruthless nature hidden behind great courtesy and feigned kindness. The Empress Dowager also starts to turn against Yan, under both the paranoia of the Yuan dynasty crumbling if Goryeo influence comes to the court, and from her own fear of losing political power. Something completely in line with her characterization as displayed prior to Taiwan becoming emperor. It also adds a layer of irony that shows how interesting of a historical era the Yuan dynasty was, in its ideals of defending the nation's culture being championed by those descended from the Mongols that conquered China, and Bai Khan openly displaying his pride in such heritage. This hypocrisy is a running theme in the series, with things such as the Empress Dowager's prayers to Buddha for the death of Yan, showcasing how some can misuse religion as a shield for their intent, or one of the series' most controversial matters. A common complaint levied against the series by its domestic audience is in its portrayal of Ki Yan as an empowering woman determined to help Goryeo, going against most historical accounts of her as inciting conflicts against Goryeo after becoming empress, or being a malevolent figure closer to the series' portrayals of Tanashili or Bayankutu. In terms of the series' own quality though, I wouldn't say this is an issue. When most of the accounts of her actions were written by her enemies in a history written by the victor scenario, there's enough room for creative liberties to be taken, in the manner many other historical works do, including one of China's 4 great classics. It's not as though Ki Yan's characterization is purely benevolent either, with the intense cruelty she shows to her enemies, as well as the selfishness she can display at times, including her misguided efforts in aiding Goryeo, of which she spells out in the final episode. The series does have some historical issues in terms of the time frame of some events, such as her father, Qi Chao, dying within the early episodes, whereas most historical accounts suggest he lived long enough to benefit from his daughter becoming Empress of the Yuan, which is what can be compared to something such as Braveheart completely changing the ages of some historical figures. Unlike with Braveheart though, in which a few changes to the historical source detract from some of the potential it could have explored, any historical change within the Empress Ki is purely in favour of the narrative, with these changes and details aiding in character dynamics and their growth. For example, those who have seen the series can imagine how different things would be if Tal Tal's character arc ended with him being exiled by Empress Ki due to the latter not liking him, and being assassinated 2 years later, as with most accounts. Another great thing that comes about from the second part of the series is the inner conflict it provides to the romantic subplot beyond the love triangle. The authority of being an emperor starts to take its toll on Taiwan, as does false information provided, which damages his trust in Yan, as what was a case of wholehearted devotion now becomes a relationship filled with risk, as the emperor becomes an adversary to Yan at times. It's also during the second half that the Eagle House that acted as a mysterious and menacing third party is fully revealed, including the identity of its leader, the eunuch Goltan, who aspires to amass as much wealth as possible to govern the fate of the Yuan dynasty from the shadows. Not only is this consistent with some of the character's decisions that came before, but comparing him to other eunuchs in the series such as Doc Man or Bulhua showcase a large dichotomy of how the eunuch caste as viewed throughout Chinese history. Since the Han Dynasty, having emasculated men perform imperial service was a common practice, primarily as they could not establish a new familial dynasty, and the more minor note of some believing it would stop their advice and choices being blinded by lust. Despite that, eunuchs using the system to emasculate political power and override the emperor's authority was shown to be a potential threat, with the 10 eunuchs whose actions and the conflict against them could be considered the first domino in the fall of the Han Dynasty. Dokman represents the noble ideal of what a court eunuch should be, whereas Godhag displays the dark path one going through with castration and political rise for their own ambitions can bring forth. Though Yan does eventually ascend to the rank of Empress, overcome her political adversaries, and establish policies to help Goryeo, the ending is bittersweet. Yuan Chao's claims of being the one stopping enemy nations from toppling Yuan are ultimately shown to be true, as rebels of border nations caused Qi to have to flee the palace after the death of Tawan, before their son Ayushidara would eventually reclaim the empire. The last episode is honestly rushed in this plotline with such an important character as Tal Tal being killed off screen, but it does go to show the transitory nature of power the series has explored with many other characters, and how the titular Empress Ki is not excluded from this. Though there's much more that could be said concerning specific characters or how well it utilizes the principles of Sun Tzu's Art of War, these are some of the main points that have cemented the Empress Ki as a masterpiece of its field, and the greatest display I've found of the quality of K-dramas. Hopefully, you will watch it if haven't not already, and allow this little known series to become a renowned work of the medium.